Brivio. He's joining us, and he's a producer for Kuno Simulazioni, and it's great to have him here. With him is David Perel. David is a South African racer with Kessel Ferrari and has won the total 24 hours of Spa twice. He also runs Coach Dave Academy. Guy Cosmo is joining us as well. He's a North American driver with the title of the 2018 Asian Le Mans Series LMP3 Championship. He's currently racing with K-PAX Racing and Bentley. Bryan Heitkotter was brought up on sim racing, winning the North American Nissan GT Academy competition and earning him a spot at the driver development program in Europe. He went on to compete at the Pirelli World Challenge in a Nissan GT-R GT3 NISMO, bringing home 7 wins and 14 podium finishes. Robbie Montinola currently leads marketing and communications at SRO Motorsports America and is helping lead production of GT World Challenge. And Anthony Comas is part of SRO Motorsports as the group marketing and business development manager, overseeing various SRO races. So there's definitely a lot to get into. Assetto Corsa Competizione, which we'll be abbreviating as ACC moving forward, is already out on PC and is slated to come out on PS4 and Xbox One on Tuesday, June 23rd. Before we jump into the nuances of sim racing, let's get to know the game a little more. Davide, my first question is for you. And of course, anyone else who would like to chime in, feel free to. So last week, Sony unveiled the PlayStation 5, and with it, we got a beautiful trailer for the new Gran Turismo 7. Sim racing fans, however, have often gravitated towards other sim racing products versus the products put out by Microsoft and Sony. So in your opinion, what is it about ACC that has sim racing fans going towards it, and why are they not going towards Microsoft and Sony's products?
Well, first of all, hi everyone, both in the live streaming and here in the interview room. Well, let's say a bomb of a first question. And first of all, you know, after a big announcement like the titles you were mentioning, we are really happy that the consideration on Assetto Corsa Competizione is still so high that people are keeping the talk on that. I think, you know, the road with ACC has been very particular because we always had a relationship with the community in developing the game from the early access first steps. And the game at the very beginning, after the launch, you know, the situation wasn't that easy. I have to be honest. For all the development team, we had the heritage of Assetto Corsa 1 that was basically entertaining any sim racer in the world, and they were expecting the maximum from the beginning, and that was also obviously our expectation. And it has been a long trip to come to a product that is now not just used by VIPs, because this is very important, but also the last of the things, you know, that big influencers like Charles Leclerc and Valentino Rossi are coming to the game. But this is just a consequence, and that's what we are really happy about, that we have a community that was there in the very first days, with some disappointment for some of them, that joined us during this journey of making ACC what it is now. So why is it considered even during these big announcements? Because it's a game that it's currently loved by the community for the job that has been done on that, because the job that has been done on that has been guided by and with the community. So I think that makes the difference. Obviously, those titles have a huge public, but our public is very, very hot.
Yeah, and you know, in regards to the PS5 and Xbox Series X, you know, will ACC? I don't know if it's been officially kind of announced for next generation consoles, but there's clearly a lot of interest in it. Will it be able to utilize the extra performance that we will find in the next generation of platforms?
Answer is pretty simple because we actually don't know, simply because the focus on the development team is now fully on continuing the PC development and to finalize the first launch on current generation console. And we obviously need to observe the focus that we will get, the feedback that we will get from the very first days and weeks to firstly continue to improve the product for PC gamers, start to, let's say, follow the feedback that we get on current generation console, and then maybe we can think about evaluating what's next, but we really have to focus on the present.
David, I have a question for you.
Sure.
And of course, Guy and Bryan, feel free to chime in. I've noticed this odd phenomenon. This is an article I'm about to pitch over to the New York Times as well. But why is it that sim racers tend to perform better than real life racers when thrown into a sim racing environment?
I think it's primarily because people think that there's such a close connection, but at the end of the day, sim is its own discipline in itself. And a lot of the muscle memory and rules that we apply to going fast in real life don't necessarily apply to when you're trying to find that last maybe half a second in a sim game. And in essence, in order to get that half second, we'd have to break a lot of the rules that we apply when we're driving in real life. And it's very hard to unlearn those things that we've developed over 20 years, starting from karting and going all the way through to GT cars. So that's something that has been actually quite surprising for me and a lot of the sim races. Even looking at the most recent 24-hour Le Mans event, I was looking at the lap times, and even the best drivers in the world couldn't come close to the lap times of the sim drivers. So it's something that I want to actually chat to the real drivers about to understand their opinion of that as well. But my opinion is that I think we need to start to see sim racing as a standalone discipline that deserves the respect of the drivers who are putting in so much effort and excelling in that discipline itself.
Guy and Bryan?
I would agree as well, and I'm approaching it from a lifetime of driving race cars, and I'm very new to sim racing itself, but I've always had a home simulator and I've dabbled with it many times over the years. But for me, it was all about recreating the real experience as much as I could, down to how I calibrated my brake pedals and steering feedback and all of these things. But once I started to compete, which was only due to this pandemic and the efforts that the SRO series has put together to keep us drivers active, to keep our fans engaged, all of a sudden I was exposed to a completely new world. And I really wish I had met David 2 months ago to help me make that transition, because it was very difficult for me to find that extra speed. Everything is so real. The tracks are identical replications of what they are in real life. All of the things that we experience in ACC is so real and so fantastic, but I've just found myself towards the back of the grid. So there are some different disciplines, exactly like David was saying, and I have not yet cracked that code, but it's been a really interesting and eye-opening experience, and I couldn't agree with him more in that I think sim racing in general really needs to be more recognized for the skill and effort that is put into it and what it takes to really succeed there. Because some of these sim drivers I've been exposed to in my short time doing this, it is phenomenal what they are able to do. So I fully agree.
Yeah, from my perspective, having come from sim racing and then jumping into real cars, I think one of the things that I've seen a lot is that people who grew up or people who have a lot of racing experience in real cars, they have the seat of the pants feel for the car, which is a huge thing that we're missing in sim racing. And for me, I didn't have that for a long time. And so when I jumped into a real car, suddenly I had this extra ability to sense what was going on with the car. And so I think sim racing actually it trains you in a different way. For racing a car, you have to depend on your other senses more. You have to depend on your vision more. You have to depend on what you feel through the force feedback steering more. And missing that seat of the pants feel means that you're kind of missing something that's a little bit integral to the experience of driving a car exactly at the limit, lap after lap after lap. And so I think that's one thing that experienced sim racers are very good at, is they're excellent at being consistently very, very fast without the seat of the pants feel from the car.
Davide, I have a quick question for you, and then I want to throw it to Robbie and Anthony. So first of all, how customizable will livery be with Competizione? And for Robbie and Anthony, how important is custom livery to ACC and competitive sim racing, and should it be open to everyone?
Well, the point is that for sure we know that within esports is kind of important to have customized liveries in addition to the original ones. And that's primarily why we do have a livery editor inside of ACC. On the other hand, it's obviously difficult to manage full customizability because you have licenses, you have brands inside the game. And on top of all, it's not something that we really limited technically, but the engine we are using did, because on the first chapter of Assetto Corsa, the engine was a proprietary one. It was a bit more easy to deal with for modders, etc. With a third-party engine that is cooking a build and closing all the content that is data and encrypting, that is not possible to leave the same kind of editing scenario for users. On the other end, we also have an important license like the SRO one. So I have to say that this was kind of handy to have as a lock. And then, I know that people manage to break the rules and add some full custom liveries. And then just, I'm personally, I would say, happy for that. Obviously, on the SRO official events side, there has been some control over the liveries that the entry had. It's kind of obvious, but I have no particular position on that. Obviously, it's not something you can bring on console, for example, because of the nature of the way that these people are editing the liveries. So it's not something like, a real decisions. It's much more like, do we want to focus on making a good simulation experience or to break the engine we are using? So that's the deal. Maybe Anthony.
Yeah, I mean, on our side, I think it has been very important for the esports series, and I think even more so with the current situation with the COVID-19, where teams were not able to go racing. They had already secured some of their partners earlier in the year, and needed to find ways also to generate value for their partners whilst not being physically on track. And I think it has been really greatly appreciated, the fact that we added some level of flexibility there for the official SRO Esports event. And yeah, I mean, brands don't want to be racing with their previous partners from last year. So I think on the esports side, it's been a huge help to be able to use custom liveries.
Yeah, and just to add into that, I think for us, obviously being with ACC being centered around the European Championship, for us, it allowed us to bring in our American GT World Challenge America liveries, which was great. So I think that was a great step forward for their partners, for our teams, and for our drivers to be able to run familiar liveries and showcase that to the American audience that we typically are in front of. So I know Guy's in the game now with the K-PAX Bentley, but we brought together some really cool liveries that were showcased through GT Rivals, which was a huge hit with our community.
Now, this is kind of a question for anybody who wants to chime in, and it's coming to us from Christopher Smith. There are a lot of simulation racing games that have hit the market, and I feel that there's a new one hitting the market every few months. How does a developer try to stand out in the crowd when the ultimate goal is to essentially just make that one same thing, which is like the most realistic driving experience?
That's also a good one. 2 months ago, we were with basically two colleagues in defining let's say, a little update to our formal company vision. That thing that you have to print on your website because you need to tell it to other people. And we were thinking about on which aspect are we really different from the rest of the world? What is our job? What is our mission and vision of things? I think, first of all, everyone in Kunos is a missed driver. Okay, we love cars. we would spend our entire day driving instead of staying behind a computer monitor. Most of us have track experience, and anytime we work on something in the products and softwares we develop, we do it with this mentality. Okay, so not just gameplay, but the overall experience and thrill that you get behind a virtual wheel for us is very important. So there are some things in Kunos that are not tolerable at all, like, for example, limiting anything or any decision that ends up dealing with the feedback that you get from driving. Then there are several other aspects. So the technical skills of our developers are really high. We are, let's say, a moderately small but very dedicated and talented team. And I'm not talking about myself, but about programmers, graphic designers, and content creators inside the game. We have a very good R&D department with people that know perfectly how to deal with real car data. So we are not there inventing numbers or making the magic. We are, in theory, just applying what's coming in terms of info from the real world into the simulation. And the compromises we do are not on the vehicle values or measures. It's just about the overall low level of calculations and programming and performance. So let's say on one end, we are not doing anything that could possibly ruin the reality of the data that we get. And then that we are probably very good in fetching those data because we have a relationship with race engineers, with drivers such as David Perel. A small example, the whole concept behind the sound effects of the ABS inside ACC has come by working closely with David. So our sound engineer worked a lot with David in getting the feedback that he had during a braking for the ABS sound. So imagine this fact multiplied by 100 aspects of a car, and that's the way we approach things. I don't like to compare the studio with any other one because there are a lot of very good simulation products out there. I'm just telling how we do things.
Bryan, as somebody who's been playing sims all of his life, and with sim racing's increase in popularity, some claim that manufacturers have pushed certain cars to get more airtime. There have been accusations of it that internal balancing of vehicles have been swayed to favor a particular brand. To what extent do you feel this is true within the community, or do you think this is kind of overblown? And if this, why does this perception exist if it's not true?
That's a good question. I actually have no idea. To be honest with you, I took a little bit of a break or a hiatus from sim racing, and I just got back into it earlier this year. So I don't really know how to answer that question. I know even in real life racing, I always kind of tended to stay away from the politics side of it. And I was just focused on driving the car the best that I could and let the chips fall.
Should I throw this over to David or, David, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I can comment on BOP all day long because I come from the real thing where this conversation is consistent. So the thing is that you're never going to have an equal level of performance for all the cars at every racetrack in a simulator or in real life. It's just not possible. There's always going to be variables or characteristics that a certain car suits a certain track. Sometimes you'll see, for example, that cars will get a faster lap time or one specific car, compared to the rest of the grid. But it could be that through the race, their tire life is not as good. Or they're not as good at following other cars. So if they get a bad start and they can't slipstream other cars and get past. The BOP discussion will be never ending. And I don't think Kunos or the SRO will ever be able to satisfy everyone when it comes to that. I know that, from my side even, I've been critical of any time I've raced a car and didn't do well, I first blame the BOP before blaming my driving. But I think it's worth looking at both sides. At the end of the day, certain tracks suit certain cars. That's unavoidable due to the characteristics. And at some point, you're going to get to a track where you can choose, where the car that you're driving is going to have a good BOP, so to speak. Are there solutions around that? Perhaps, but I don't think that adds to the realism. I like the system that Kunos is using to set the BOP for the cars around the tracks. And I think that maps very realistically to what we experience in real life. So it's a discussion that will never die, but it's a discussion also that from a real driver's point of view is also not boring, but it's just so consistent. And when it's usually coming from the people who don't win the race. So.
So do you reject kind of the conspiracy theorists that say, oh, such and such manufacturer made such and such deal with this game, that's why their car is doing better?
Yeah, I've heard that discussion a few times. And if that was the case, then you'd see that car dominate at every racetrack, but it doesn't happen. They tend to do well at one racetrack. And then if you look back in the history of the game and the lap times that have been achieved by that car at that track, if you put a top sim driver in it, they usually are able to exploit it to the level that is done at a serious event like the ESRO or GT Rivals races.
Let's see, Davide, I want to throw something quickly at you. I know game development is really difficult and costs a lot of money and takes up a lot of time. But if you had that kind of unlimited time, unlimited budget, what would you want to bring to your development team, to ACC, that you probably just, what would be your dream?
Time?
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, if there was an endless budget, I think that any Kunos developer would probably do the same exact things we do, but with double of the time at disposal, because obviously costs are a topic of the thing, but also time it's surely something more of a topic. And stress levels, and obviously the pressure that you can get from a game development. Then in terms of we are in a particular position, because before I was answering on how why are we so good in doing handling and all the gameplay and perception side of things development. It's obviously passion, but it's also licenses. So we have a very powerful licensing department, so basically Marco, and we can deal with manufacturers at the very highest level we can think of. So there is nothing that you can buy with more money, but time. So imagine a project like this with the double of the time, but this is the real world, and then
right.
That's it.
We have a question coming in from Davide Mancini from IGN Italy, and this is going to David, Guy, or Bryan. So although ACC is a game that has always had a great relationship with reality, never, as in this period, are so many real drivers playing an impressive amount of hours. Is this proving useful from a point of view feedback? Has something interesting / particular emerged that you are currently working on?
I think I've been using sim racing my whole life to try and improve as a real life driver, mostly because when I was growing up as a kart racer, I only had one track in the area that in my province. So I had to use a simulator to try and learn how to learn other racetracks. These days, as I explained in the preview video, I use a simulator more to understand how I react physically under pressure and how I can become more self-aware and improve upon that in the real world. A big problem for me in real life racing has always been my qualifying. So I used this 2 month sort of hiatus to compete in as many high pressure online events as possible to try and simulate the same pressure that I feel before qualifying. And I do think I've made a step there, and I can't wait to bring that to the real world. And the majority of that progress was made through ACC and the ESRO and GT Rivals events. So that's one thing from my side. I'm really excited to see if I've made a step there. The other thing that I've already used simulators for a very long time was practicing overtaking maneuvers. And all the moves that I do in real life have always come from something that I developed on the simulator. either playing online or just through the AI, practicing start sequences. So there's a lot of value from my side. I've always used the sim as deliberate practice for real life.
Yeah, and from my side, another aspect to look at it, what it has provided all of us is that racing is still a business. We have manufacturers that are heavily invested in what's taking place. We have a huge audience with a great fan base that follows us on social media and usually attend the races live in person. So we've had a very interesting period lately where everything has been put on hold, and we have business agreements and relationships and deals between drivers and teams and sponsors that are involved, and then also just the entertainment factor of why we all race. We do it because we love to compete, we love to race, and we love to drive cars and tinker with these things, but at the end of the day, we're putting on a show. And when we are stricken with a situation where our series has obligations to continue the show, ACC provided, and Robbie can attest to this, ACC provided SRO with this perfect opportunity to create a virtual championship so that all of the drivers and teams and sponsors and manufacturers who were slated to gain exposure and visibility and continue their marketing agendas, we had a platform to execute all of that. So we've got the driving side, we have the educational side, we have the marketing side, the business side. It's been an incredible way to satisfy all of these things when the world has been shut down for, reasons out of our control. It's been a really interesting opportunity, and it's satisfied it really well, I would say.
I think for me, it's kind of been a continuum, kind of my whole sim racing career, in terms of using it as a tool to improve real life driving. I wasn't aware that I was doing that when I was much younger. I've been playing simulated racing games since 1992. So it's been quite a journey, long before I had a driver's license. But as simulations get more and more realistic and more in depth, the overlap between what you can experience online versus what you experience in a real car at a real track just continues to grow. So I'm personally just always learning and always looking for learning opportunities, whether that be, just driving itself at the limit, or like racecraft, or performing under pressure, like David said, or even in a setup screen, tinkering with this and that, learning what adjustments, how they affect the car, and how to make the car handle the way you want, and also achieve the lap time that you want, and consistency as well. So for me, sim racing it's kind of an endless search for perfection and search for improvement, that you'll never achieve that perfection. But there's so much depth and nuance to sim racing, especially at the level that it is right now, to where to me it's kind of like an endless resource towards improving in real life.
Very good. So let's, I'm going to throw this question out to everyone. What can real world sports and events take away from the success of digital ventures like SRO's GT Rivals in America and the GT Esports series in Europe?
Well, I'll give it a go. I think something that we can see is the real access there are for fans watching, and motorsports is even more so, a sport that struggles to get that access because of the nature of wearing a helmet, where you don't see the driver's emotions. You recognize a helmet, but not really a face walking in the paddock. And I think in the motorsport scene, esports has really helped put through the emotions, and the drivers are engaging with the audience on their Twitch channel. At the same time, the face cam is they're able to see the driver. So there's a lot more understanding from a fan perspective about what's happening in the real life. So I would say definitely the access to the public is something that, let's say, normal sports can gain a lot from the esports.
Yeah, definitely. Accessibility has been, key to a GT World Challenge in general. Our paddocks are very open. You can walk up to the drivers and teams in real life. And what ACC, I think, has provided us now, especially, in this time, we've opened our eyes to see this huge community of fans that are engaged in sim racing and the sim community. that have opened their arms to us and all the real world pros and just be super helpful, just getting us dialed in and ready to race. That, you know, there's this vast market of sim racers that, you know, can go play ACC any day of the week, and be immersed into this GT World Challenge atmosphere, but maybe have never stepped foot in a real world event before, and now it gives them access to that. And then bringing in, you know, the pros to co-racing during these last few months have been great to just shine a spotlight on that and add that extra layer of support that sim racing may have needed to continue to move forward and become more mainstream as an esport, as in other titles have been on the, you know, like the League of Legends or you know, Overwatch and those types of tournaments. So I think this has really helped motorsports come out of its shell in terms of sim racing, and give us another complementing platform to real world racing that we can now look to and engage with more, and just be a fun project that drivers, teams, manufacturers, partners, and everyone could be involved with to further the sport, both in the real world as well as the sim side of things.
Very good. So, you know, I'm going to throw off some quick rapid fire questions before we close out the panel. So here's one coming from Stefano Casati of the Games Machine in Italy. Let's see. And the question's about ACC as a career gateway for fans. As the during COVID-19, many have tried their hands at e-racing, and all the fans that have felt, you know, more like real pilots. With the results achieved by simulations like Assetto Corsa Competizione, have the chances of a normal person getting closer to the racing world, the real racing world, increase? Is it easier to approach the motorsports world also thanks to products like ACC? I'll throw this one over at Guy.
I think there's a good possibility. I think there's going to be a time now for transition and a lot of interest for seeing how the two worlds can merge. I know for somebody, you know, like myself, who has been pro racing for many years, I do coaching. I now help manage race programs and help young drivers find their way a little bit. You know, this has caught my attention, and it has caught my attention in a way that we're going to go back to racing for real, but I am not going to take my eye or my interest out of sim racing. So this time has changed the perception for everybody. I think we're going to find a transition period now where a lot of programs will be implemented to maybe narrow down the path of sim racing on a global scale, to see if we can implement more and more opportunities for sim racers to get their way into race cars. It's going to be interesting, but I think for sure this is going to help bridge that gap.
Yeah, and then Bryan, I guess I want to throw this to you because you did, you know, make that jump. Explain quickly, I guess, your experience, and do you think like that can continue to be replicated in the future?
Absolutely. I think it's only going to grow from here. I think the competition that I was involved in was probably one of the first to really legitimize the concept of going from sim racing to racing real cars and doing it successfully. Mm-hmm. And I think it's only going to grow. I mean, since then, that was 9 years ago, sim racing has just grown exponentially, you know, both in terms of volume, but also the level of competition, especially. And so I think we're just going to see more of those opportunities going forward, especially from the marketing side. There's so much more marketing involved in sim racing now than there was 10, 15 years ago. It's really remarkable. So yeah, I think just going forward, we're just going to see more and more opportunities pop up, you know, everywhere.
Let's see, Robbie and Anthony. This question comes from Josh Soto from Motorsport. Are you confident that like esports and sim racing will be able to maintain its momentum after real life racing resumes?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think that, I mean, that actually the heavy involvement of real life drivers in sim racing across the last couple of months has kind of legitimized sim racing to kind of wider audience. And I think that's going to lead to, you know, more people who would not have contemplated getting themselves a rig before, say, you know what, actually, you know, this looks great. All types of, you know, the top drivers are getting involved. Why don't I give it a chance? So, I mean, obviously we've seen, you know, unprecedented coverage over the last couple of months. But I really don't think it's, you know, it's just going to go down. For sure, maybe we are at a peak. But it's not going to plateau. And I think sim racing in general can only get more popular as the technology makes it closer to the reality throughout the year. So I don't see it fall off a cliff at all.
Yeah, definitely. I think, one thing that we'll take a look at too is, as David mentioned earlier in the conversation, is, we really need to shine a spotlight on the sim racing community itself and treat it as its own. So I think we need to also look at that and how do we then continue on with championships that focus on the sim racers, but then also have some real world drivers come in and be invited guests to keep the exposure level high as well. So I think that's, there is a big future of sim racing. We've only kind of scratched the surface, and Anthony and I will go to work and try to make a great experience for both the sim racing and the real world community to kind of blend those two together and have a esports offering globally that does ACC its justice of Kunos making a fantastic sim platform for us to compete on.
Cool. And then we have a quick question from, actually, let's make this the final question. Or no, hold on one second. Yeah. So let's make this the final question then. This is from Fabrizio Bianchini from GameSource. And it involves the difference in game physics between the PC and console versions. From the point of view of game physics, with porting to consoles, can we expect the same reaction and same dynamics of the vehicle that we currently have on the PC counterpart? Or did the reduced performance of the consoles require the team over at ACC to iron out something in this regard? He's referring to a particular type of tire grip pattern, the reaction based on the slightest tweak applied to the tuning menu, and so on.
Those things remain all the same, fortunately. So the work that has been done on the console version is a graphics optimization that started from 3D models, polygons down to effects, and the physics will be fortunately the same. So that is our primary aim, to bring the same exact experience from PC to console. Obviously, the graphics engine and the overall product are modern and heavy for a PC, so you can expect that there has been a graphics tweaking on the console side of things. I've personally also tested and played the game, so I have to say that I'm not set at all for results, because it's pretty enjoyable. There will be a car amount limitation, so to 20 cars, both in single and multiplayer. That again is a compromise, but a needed one, and I think it's acceptable, let's say. Also because the most of the SRO esports event starts with 50 drivers and end up with 26 or something because of damages, DNF or anything. And then there will be a performance improvement from the base PS4 and Xbox One to the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X. So while the baseline consoles will be respectively 1080p on PS4 and 900p on Xbox One, on the Pro versions, they will be both up to 4K and natively 4K on Xbox One X. And some graphics elements will be tweaked above. So, for example, view distances, particle effects, etc., will be better in the Pro and the X versions of the consoles.
Okay, David, one more question before we close it out. So this comes from William Marsh. What compromises or sacrifices have you had to make for ACC to work properly on console with reasonable performance?
What compromises? Sorry?
Have you had to make any compromises to make it run on console, but still perform reasonably well?
Yeah, on the graphic side. So our first, when you go with a product that is running on very high-end PCs and average PCs for sim racers, and you go on consoles that have a lower hardware, you have to make a compromise. You just have to choose where and hope for the best. In our case, we chose, because of our vision, to keep the physics and AI the same. So the experience should be a GT3 simulation, the best one we can personally, as a company, achieve. Hopefully one of the best GT3 simulation out there. And then the compromises. So drawing this line immediately points the compromises in the graphics department. So basically, again, from modeling. So if you can reduce the polygons on some hidden parts of the circuit, that certainly helped a lot. But also on some graphics effects. You know, the game is pretty much intensive on hardware when you are in night under rain. And so all those indirect, direct and indirect reflections of light, etc., needed to be tweaked below the level that we can see on an Epic on PC. Obviously, those are the kinds of compromise we needed to do.
All right, great. All right, with that,
one thing
yes,
really important for both platform players is that this kind of optimization work literally and significantly helped the PC version to proceed in a much more optimized way, because once you notice those profiling features, you can apply them on PC too, because it's technology, you know, it's polygon reduction, optimization of the effects. And so it's very much important for us to do this kind of path and journey where we also deliver to console.
Well, you heard it here, folks. With console, you're getting still a great simulation experience, and it's actually helped the PC performance as well. With that, thank you everyone for joining us on this panel. Thank you to the panelists and to the audience, and for the journalists for submitting the questions. You know, we hope you continue to stay safe out there. Please stay indoors. Continue to sim race, you know, indoors. And, you know, go ahead and Google all the panelists. Give them more Twitter followers. They definitely deserve it. The console versions of ACC are set to release on June 23rd. And with that, you know, we'll catch you guys at the next panel whenever we have it. Thank you, guys.